Konnichiwa minasan. Business Success Japan no podcast e youkoso. Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of the Business Success Japan podcast. This is your host, Lydia Buchelman. My main goal here is to create an easily accessible resource for those who want to develop Japan-specific communication skills, especially in business. While I can't and won't promise to make you fluent in Japanese, I hope that you will walk away from each episode with a skill, piece of information, or shift in mindset that will help you be more effective in your interactions with Japanese business people. I just wanted to take a quick second to remind you that I've put together a cheat sheet for people who want to start or continue their Japanese language studies. It's really just meant to give you some guidance if you're feeling overwhelmed and trying to figure out how to get started, or if you're looking for what resources you should try to incorporate in your studies next. Just reach out to me using the email in the description of this episode and I'll make sure that you get access. So before we get into today's interview, let's review the phrase we learned in the previous episode. ごちそうさまでした。ごちそうさまでした。ごちそうさまでした。This phrase roughly translates to, it was a feast, but really it's just a set phrase that you can use after you finish a meal in Japan in order to express gratitude. Today's phrase is very simple and versatile. どうぞ。どうぞ。どうぞ. This phrase can have various definitions, including here you are, help yourself, and so on. You will often hear this phrase used when a waiter brings you food, for example. You can use this phrase yourself if you are offering something to someone else, such as a seat on the train. So today's guest is Sébastien, who is currently the community manager at a company called Japan Travel. You've probably come across their website at some point if you've ever planned a trip to Japan. Their website is filled with contributions from partners all over the country, so there's always new and interesting content being added apart from the standard Tokyo, Osaka, and Kyoto hotspots. Though of course they have plenty of information about even those locations as well. They also offer a bunch of services for planning trips, logistics, and even tours, so be sure to check out the description of this episode to find a link to their website. They are also working to expand their content to 15 different languages, so it's a great resource for people all over the world. Sébastien will explain his history in Japan during our interview, but since much of what he says has to do with specific dietary restrictions in Japan, any listeners who have alternative diets will definitely benefit. But of course, anyone who eats will enjoy this episode as well, so be sure to stick around. All right, so today's guest is named Sébastien, and if you wouldn't mind going ahead and introducing yourself to my audience.
Hi, everybody, and thanks, Lydia, for this opportunity. My name is Sébastien. I'm from France, and I've been living in Japan for 15 years. I'm a big fan of the country. I enjoy especially its diverse landscapes. We have Siberian climate in Hokkaido in the north. We have in the south in Omotenashi. I like the hot springs, and I like the people in Japan. We are really, really great. One of the things I prefer to do during my free time is hiking, and for my work, I try to make a better world.
Yeah, so then how did you get involved with Japan? Your history with the country?
On the contrary to many people, I had no special interest in Japan initially. I did see a few anime on TV, but I was not a big otaku. So I came to Japan the first time to do an internship when I was studying virtual reality for my master's degree. I wanted to do my internship abroad. So I had the choice between the USA and Japan. And when I checked what was possible, I saw in the USA most of the projects are related to military fundings, which was not necessarily what I wanted to promote. And in Japan was more like crazy ideas, like interfaces you put in the mouth to simulate you're eating some kind of food. So Japan looked much more interesting, at least in that sense. And this is how I came to Japan the first time. What happened is people in Japan don't speak much English, and I don't speak much Japanese. I didn't speak any Japanese at that time, to be honest. And I couldn't read any kanji around. So I got very frustrated during my internship in Japan, and I decided to come back to really discover the country, learn the language and meet the people. So I came back a bit later, a few months later, to do a PhD. And I've been in Japan most of the time afterwards.
So then what kind of work are you doing now specifically?
Now I'm working for a company called Japan Travel KK. It's both a media and travel agency. So the company is creating, for example, websites and contents to promote tourism in Japan for different regions. And on the other hand, my colleagues are organizing trips for people. The unique aspect about the company is that it was created after the big earthquake we had in 2011, and it started basically with our CEO, Terry Lloyd, gathering people to try to inform people about the situation, like radiation, things like this, and when things were better, to help support the local businesses, things like this. And he gathered people, big group of volunteers. So what happened is the company is built on a community that has been growing from just one person to now more than 20,000 people. And I'm the community manager of that company, which means I have to provide support for these 20,000 people. I have to find new people who are big fans of Japan and guide them on how to support the country. And because we have many opportunities for people who live in Japan, can also help people develop their skills and career. For example, they can help by becoming advisors for projects, their own point of view as an American, as a Spanish, as a vegan, as a Muslim, as a person in a wheelchair about travel in Japan. We also help people who are writers, and this can be done completely remotely. So I have to take care of the people we have. I have to find the right people to help with projects, and I try to make things beneficial for the Japanese people, the community members who help, and of course for the company at the same time.
Yeah, that sounds like a lot of people you have to manage. So it almost sounds like kind of a crowdsourced resource to promote travel and development in Japan.
Yeah, I think that's an easy way to see things. Just to clarify a bit things, of course, I have all my team who have been helping, and we organize things in kind of pyramidal way. So I have 50 people approximately who are special community members who are trusted, who know very well their regions, who have been providing advice for a long time. So I'm working mostly with these 50 people, and they take care of groups of people, for example, living in the prefecture, they live themselves.
How did you get involved with that company then?
Had been working with another company in marketing, and I felt I didn't have any decision power, so I would not be able to have a really big impact for travelers in Japan. It was a marketing company for inbound tourism. And I decided not to stay in the company, and I was looking for something else to do. And I contacted people I knew, and I think like many people, you don't find a job in a small ad, at least a good job, but through the people you know. So I contacted people I knew, and unexpectedly, one of the ladies I had met during a seminar related to promotion of local activities told me about her company. So her name is Megumi, and she's still working for Japan Travel. And she said that with my background and interest, I could bring lots of value, and she would be very happy to introduce me to the company. So I met the boss, and I think in a few hours I had met the CEO, the creative director. I had had a short Japanese interview with one of the Japanese travel agents in the company. I had met all these people, and they looked really nice. And a few days later, I was in the company.
Wow. So that was a pretty quick turnaround for you then, but that's amazing.
Yes, and I mean the company is kind of Japan Travel website is kind of one of the big ones. Website is probably the biggest one because it's in certain languages, but to be honest, I had never used it. The reason is I'm doing all my research in Japanese.
Mhm.
So I go on Japanese website. But I think for people who don't speak Japanese or read Japanese, this is probably one of the biggest resources. So maybe some of your listeners will already know about the company.
Mhm. Yeah, I'm sure if people have been researching Japan at all, that they've come across some of the resources there because it's pretty comprehensive. It's very accessible. So, going back a little bit, how did you improve your Japanese so much?
Okay, so the first thing was during the internship, really, I couldn't speak at all.
Mhm.
So I understood it was very important to make big efforts to be able to enjoy the country. So I had this very strong motivation behind it. I think the motivation is the first thing, because when you have to study all the kanji and a grammar that is so different from English, for example,
Mhm.
if you don't have that motivation, you just will not make progress, or you will just stop in your tracks. And when I came back to Japan for my PhD studies, the university provided free Japanese classes. I think it was 4 times a week, 1 hour. We were working, studying with a book called Mina no Nihongo.
Oh, yeah.
And and we had a Japanese teacher who spoke only in Japanese to us to
Mhm.
force us to use completely the thing. So what happened is that we had a big group, and after 2 months, I really noticed that I was not very happy with the group. In fact, the reason was I was one of the only ones who was really motivated due to my previous internship that didn't work that well, language-wise.
Mhm.
I was probably the only one that was really motivated to become completely fluent. And so there was this big gap in level. And when we were studying with a Japanese teacher, the method was really focusing on one point of grammar every time. So when people were talking, if that grammatical point was correct, we were moving to the next person, even if there were many other mistakes in the sentence. And I started to notice mistakes in the sentences, and I was kind of shocked the teacher didn't correct people. So it's just a choice of method, but that made me think that if I'm just listening to people around me, I might just learn things that are wrong. So I stopped going to the classes and I studied by myself.
Hmm.
And I was going to a cafe every day, spending maybe 1 hour and a half by myself. And I started also to do language exchanges with Japanese people who are very good in English. So we started speaking only in English. And every time I was learning something by myself or through the language exchange, I was trying to reuse it the next time, and using again and again and again the same thing in your everyday life. It becomes really part of the knowledge you have. So I could move from 99% English to 50% English to 99% Japanese in the discussions. So I think it was lots of work by myself, plus language exchange and using in everyday life every time I could. Also, I'm French, and I really made an effort to not be in contact with French people. So I was using Japanese as much as I could.
Yeah, that's definitely a good way to go about it. I hear from a lot of people that it's just very easy to get sucked into the expat bubble, which there's nothing wrong with spending time with expats. But if your goal is to really improve your Japanese, that's not really the way that you should be spending your time.
That's true. And I would have maybe one piece of advice for people. I think there is one of the big points about learning the Japanese language is learning the culture too, because the grammar is also so different. For example, in English, you say, I did something, but in Japanese, very often you don't even need to put the subject in the sentence. And the feeling you have about things is very different if you understand the culture. So you need to learn both of them to be able to improve your Japanese level. Otherwise, you're just translating, but it will sound unnatural.
I completely agree with you because I majored in Japanese in college, but the focus was primarily just on the language without about the way Japanese people tend to think. And of course, that's all tied into Japanese culture overall. Like you said, you just end up translating everything. So you one, don't sound natural, and two, you just say things
completely wrong way, because you're just trying to make things verbatim instead of figuring out what things actually mean and doing it that way. Oh, sorry for the little sidetrack, but going back to what you were saying about company and working in the travel agency, I'm sure that you've come in contact with a lot of traditional Japanese hospitality. Would you be able to
Yep.
tell us a little bit more about that?
I've met lots of people in hotels. I've met lots of people who are just artisans who are very happy to share knowledge about the things they make, their crafts, like making objects made of gold, for example, or just made of wood. And I've been really amazed by how clean things are in Japan. Of course, in the street, and that's more like the behavior of people, but in the hotels, people are really making an effort so that things don't look too old, that there is the proper decorations at the right place, that you're greeted when you arrive. People might have difficulty speaking in English. So in fact, if you go in the countryside, it's more like a feeling than really understanding what's going on. But you have many, many small things that are prepared for visitors that are really, really exciting. For example, you go to a traditional inn, you will have on the table already tea ready for you. You will have some small cookies that are probably regional ones, maybe seasonal ones. You will have drawers with a yukata you can wear while you are in the traditional inn. That will be, so the drawers will be already kind of half open. And when you have 3 drawers on top of each other, they will be open at a length, so you can see what's inside each drawer. So you can have one with the yukata itself, one for the belt, things like this. And it's already ready for you to just notice everything you need to notice and to just feel comfortable immediately. Also, one thing that's very different from what I've seen in other countries is when you go to a traditional inn and you sleep, for example, on a tatami, you will have a big table, for example, typically in the middle of the room. When you arrive, you put your bags, and if you go eat in the restaurant of the inn, when you come back, maybe the table has been pushed away and some staff has put the futon on the tatami instead, so everything is ready for you to go to bed. And you don't see the staff do that. It just appears magically. So the first time, it's very, very surprising. I think there are many exciting and surprising things going on in Japan, hospitality. And people are always trying to give you a good quality of service. The only problem I've seen in Japan is really the ability to speak English, in fact, or French or Spanish.
Yeah, thank you for bringing up the kind of room turnover that they do, because I had that experience in Japan. I was completely not expecting it, so I kind of left my things everywhere. I left my bag open and things like that. So just remember that people may be coming in your room after you, so try not to leave your bag wide open on the floor if you're in an inn.
Yeah, I can understand that. Yeah.
I'm sure they were a little surprised by that too. This form of hospitality, omotenashi, is there anything in particular that you appreciate about it?
Oh, okay. So omotenashi is a concept basically related to Japanese hospitality, and it's mainly anticipating needs. So that's, for example, having the futon ready when you come back from dinner is a very good example. But it's also providing good service without expecting any reward. So in Japan, you don't give tips, for example, and you pay attention to details all the time. So from a traveler perspective or from a foreigner coming from a business trip, things can be maybe not noticed at all, but you just feel so comfortable. And this is one of the things I really appreciate about Japanese hospitality. Just to give a few examples of how things look in different contexts. When you take a taxi, the driver will have a small system that allows him to push. He just pushes a lever and the door opens for you to get in and to go out. So you don't have to take the handle and to use your strength. So it's very, very smooth for you. When you go to a restaurant, typically you can have chopsticks in different settings, but if it's wooden chopsticks wrapped in paper, when you remove the paper and you break the chopsticks, you separate them, you will find in between a very small toothpick. So it's already ready for the end of the meal. It's available for you. Also, you get towels when you arrive to wipe your hands to make sure you're clean. When you go to the restrooms, you will have a small holder. That's very typical, a small holder where you can put your umbrella, which is one of the most important objects in Japan.
Mhm.
And you have the same thing in near ATM machines. You can't really use your credit cards in many shops nowadays, so you would probably go to an ATM machine, and you have a holder too for your bag or for your umbrella. Other things is gifts. Your purchases are always wrapped in many layers and typically beautifully made. So that can be a bit annoying when you're packing back to go back to your country and you want to make things as small as possible to fit in your suitcase. But this is really very, very nice when it's for you or when you bring it to somebody else. So this is the kind of things I really like about Omotenashi, and it's really in everyday life. It's not just hospitality in the narrow sense of only the hotel or only with the guide or in the bus.
Mhm. So this attention to detail and anticipating of needs sounds like such a great thing. So what could possibly be wrong with omotenashi?
Well, Omotenashi is assumes that people will appreciate all the services. So it's typically working very well with Japanese people because it's the same culture. But when you're coming from a different country, you can feel there is a gap with your own expectations. So, for example, I think most Americans and French people want to have coffee for breakfast. And in hotels, it's typically okay, but in bed and breakfast places, in traditional inns, you might have trouble getting coffee for breakfast. Maybe you need to go to a vending machine, which can be in the building, or you need to go to a nearby convenience store, but it's not like you have tea in the room, but you don't have coffee, even if it's just instant coffee, right?
Mhm.
So people are really used to foreigners coming, and they know foreigners like coffee, but they don't change the way they organize things. Another problem would be for people who come from Taiwan. I think it's approximately 20% vegans, or
Oh,
people
wow.
who come from the Middle East, or I think Malaysia, Indonesia, there are quite a few Muslims. So the problem in that case is the menus have not been designed to allow these people to at least immediately see if there is something for them. And in most cases, there is really, for vegans, most of the time, there is absolutely nothing. So Omotenashi is good because it anticipates needs, but it's not like the client is always right. It's more like we do what we know is best for the client. And when you have this kind of cultural gap, the decisions made by the Japanese doesn't match really the needs of the travelers and the business people. So this is where things go wrong. I think we have more and more inns making efforts, and hotels and restaurants, but it's really not perfect. So you have to plan things accordingly. Another thing is in many shops, even in touristic areas, you don't have English menus. So in some shops, it's very easy because outside you have this kind of fake food models that are very realistic. So at least you have an idea of what you're going to get.
Mhm.
But for vegans, it may not tell you if there is milk or fish in the soup, for example. And in other places, everything is just written in Japanese, and the only thing you can do is to point at the dish of somebody on another table. So things are moving a bit slowly in that direction, right?
Tell us a little bit more about how alternative diets are treated in Japan. I know from other people's experiences, from my own experiences a little bit as well. Restaurants in Japan are kind of notorious for if somebody asks for, oh, can I have this, but even just like without onions or something simple like that, the waiter either freezes or has to go talk to literally everybody else and then come back and say, I'm sorry, we can't do that. It has to all be together. So can you tell us a little bit more about how especially if they have allergies or something, how that sort of thing is dealt with in Japan typically?
Yes. One thing people need to know first is many of the restaurants in Japan are really specialized. So you go to a shop, it will be only ramen. You go to another shop, it will be maybe only curry. You go to another shop, it's only sushi. So you don't have a diversity on the menu that allows you to take, oh, I'm going to get the salad, or I'm going to get chicken instead of beef. So you have to choose the restaurant properly from the start to be in the right category. This is the most important thing. Then on lunchtime, especially, for example, in big cities like Tokyo and Osaka, people will have a short break, go back to work. So everything is organized so that you eat very, very quickly, which means nobody's asking for any personalized preparations. Also, in some cases, you just don't even order the food to the chef or to the staff. You just go on a machine and you push one button where you have chosen your food. So there is, again, no way to personalize things. So if you're vegan, for example, if you're vegetarian, one option is to just go to Indian restaurants, which is not the most exciting choice. If you go to Japan, you want Japanese food, but at least it's a practical way of doing things. Now, if you're vegan, it becomes much more complicated. So it depends completely on where you are. If you are in Kyoto, Osaka, so the Kansai area, you will have many restaurants that provide shojin ryori, which is Buddhist traditional cuisine, which is vegan. And the reason is because Buddhism arrived in Japan in this area. If you're in Tokyo, you have much less choice. So the first thing is, depending on the area where you are, you have different options. If you're in Tokyo, you will find lots of information online about restaurants that provide vegan food, and it may not be the best food, it may not be the cheapest food, but you will be able to find it. If you go in family restaurants, you will probably not find really what you need. You might just end up ordering a salad and removing the small shrimps by yourself. It's very difficult to know what ingredients are in the food, so that makes things very, very complicated. But for example, recently, one of the big fast food chains called Moss Burger launched a plant-based burger. So you can just go to a Moss Burger and order what they call the green burger, and it will be. So that makes things easy. Also for Muslims, in a way, Muslims, it's easier because you just look for the keyword halal online, and you will find lots of information for touristic places. So in Tokyo, in Asakusa area, you will find several restaurants that have been opened by foreigners, or maybe the owner is Japanese, but with a foreign partner. And some of the staff is Muslim, so you're sure things are really reasonably sure that things are halal. If you go to Kyoto, you will find also lots of restaurants that will be like halal beef, halal chicken, but you have to be careful to avoid typically ramen because it's the soup. You don't see pieces of meat, but the soup is prepared using pork. So the famous foods in Japan is typically the ramen noodles, the sushi, which is made with fish, the tempura, which is mostly seafood and vegetables. So you have really little choice on the very, very famous foods. What I would recommend is really to maybe look online for cooking classes and go for an activity where you will learn and you will eat the food afterwards. That's a good solution. If you are in Japan at the right time, at the right place, you could go to a vegan festival, which is, with the coronavirus now, I think many events are canceled, but it was a good option at least last year. And if you can spend some time doing a night at a Buddhist temple, you're almost sure you can eat vegan food on site. And also, nowadays, you can, if you know exactly where to look at in Tokyo Station, you can find vegan sushi. You also have, and this is takeaway, so you can just take in the Shinkansen to your next destination. You can eat at the hotel in a different city afterwards. You also have like ramen noodles, like for example, a shop called Tea's Tantan. This shop is so famous that even the natural Lawson convenience stores have started to sell their instant noodles, which are vegan.
Wow.
I'm not sure. I don't think it's all the convenience stores of natural Lawson. So, but at least Tokyo, I believe most of them. There are at least 2 tastes, and I bought them. So they're nice enough. One way to be flexible when you're a traveler is to find a place where you can get a vegan bento. So you go buy it and you can just eat when you want in a completely different area. Otherwise, you're really blocked by having to be in specific places at specific times to eat your meal. And many of the vegan restaurants have irregular closing days. So you might just arrive and it's closed today. So additional things, because your question was also about much broader. So we have now many restaurants in Tokyo that are gluten-free. You find the information very easily online. But for people who have allergies, it's very difficult because you have that kind of information on the menu. People may not speak at all English, so you can just ask them if there is one ingredient, like, I don't know, peanut or whatever, in the food. But you have, for example, one of the chains of foods called Otoya. I think you can find Otoya restaurants in many of the big cities in Japan. And they have a menu that includes a big list of ingredients at the end. The menu is very diverse. It's you can order kind of almost anything except sushi, probably. And you have a list of the ingredients used for the different dishes at the end. I just don't remember if it's also in English, but I'm definitely sure it's in Japanese at least available.
Okay, that's good to know.
One more thing, because we are speaking in English and your own listeners are probably mostly Americans, the word for allergy is allergie. So it's very similar. It's based on the English. So you can just say allergie and maybe you use your cell phone to show with automatic translations the name of the food for which you're allergic. And that can just maybe make things quite smooth during your stay.
I've also seen some printable cards online where people can get some help figuring out what to write in Japanese. So basically it would just be saying, I have allergies to these things. So if you could just get one of those, laminate it, bring it with you everywhere, that would definitely be a good idea.
Yeah, that's a good idea. That's really a good idea.
Yeah,
And
especially if it's a serious one.
Yeah, especially if it's for kids or if it's a very strong ones. But even if it's not too, I mean, if it's very light, you don't really care. But if it's not that light, but even not that strong, just remember that when you're abroad, you have the jet lag. You're probably very tired at the end of the day. If you come in summer, it's going to be very humid and heavy. So anything that goes a bit wrong with your body will feel a bit stronger. So you should pay attention to that, definitely.
Definitely don't want to get sick or overextend your digestive system while you're traveling. That's never a good situation.
That you can also just go to convenience stores and just buy very simple rice balls, which are triangles, in fact, in Japan, onigiri. The ingredients are relatively simple. So you might just have one word written, maybe in Japanese, maybe in English, on the front telling you there is salmon or something like this, but you don't end up with a mix of many ingredients. So if you're allergic to peanuts, the risk that there is some in the onigiri is almost zero.
Yeah, that's a really good idea. They do have some simple foods, but also, unfortunately, if you were hoping to just avoid foods based on your allergies by having fresh fruit, it might be something that would actually break your budget while you're in Japan. So,
well, yeah, if you go to supermarkets, you can really find lots of stuff. But I think if you start to buy fruit, I mean, tomatoes would be okay.
yes.
But if you start to buy peaches or things like this, you will see the price for one peach. Maybe as an American, you would think it's the price for the full pack of peaches. So that's a difficult one. But for example, if you have the chance to join a group tour, or if you are ready to drive in Japan, you can also go to this kind of fruit picking activities if it's the right season. So maybe not winter, and depending on the region where you are, for example, in Hokkaido, you could probably do melon. Near Mount Fuji, you could probably do strawberries and grapes. If you're in Okayama, it's very famous for the peaches, in Tottori for the pears. So you can go for this kind of activities, and it's typically all you can eat. So it may not be too cheap, maybe $25 minimum, but you can eat as much as you want, and the fruits are really, really good. And if you have a car, for example, that's just you can just go to between two destinations. So that would be a good solution too.
That's a great idea. I didn't get a chance to do that when I was in Japan, but next time I definitely want to make a point of it. It's not cheap, but it's one of the cheaper ways to get your fill of
and it's
fruit.
very, very high quality. The
Mm-hmm.
fruit is typically super sweet. The
Mm-hmm.
grapes will be juicy. If you go for strawberry picking, my image when I went for strawberry picking would be, you pick up the strawberries. And of course you pick up the strawberries, but you might have, I don't know, 5, 6, 10 different types of strawberries that have, of course, different shape, but also different taste. So depending on the week of the year, you might have the choice between only 3 or 4, but you can just pick up and compare. And it's not too boring, because if you had only one type, you might just get bored with eating 30 identical strawberries.
Mm-hmm. That's such a good idea. So, looking at Japanese culture related to food, you mentioned that convenience plays a big part in hard to make substitutions just because they're trying to get people in and out so quickly. But is there any other part of Japanese culture that might kind of make it difficult for Japanese businesses and restaurants to accommodate dietary restrictions specifically?
I think for one thing, probably that washoku cuisine
Mhm.
was registered as a UNESCO World Heritage, intangible World Heritage. So Japanese food is really recognized as a great, great food. And we have also, I think Tokyo has the biggest number of Michelin stars restaurants worldwide as a city. So we have really, really good food. But on the other hand, you also know that Japanese people live a very, very long time. And that's probably partly due to their food. So the idea is you need to have healthy food so you don't eat too much, but also you make sure in every meal you have many ingredients in small quantities to make sure your body gets everything it needs, and not too much of something. That means when you take a soup, there may be so many ingredients in it. And for example, if you're vegan, it may not be just let's remove the pieces of chicken. No, 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 because you already have a mix maybe of several things related to shrimp, to chicken, and it's not pieces you can just take because it's really in the soup. So the first aspect is, in Japanese food you mix many, many different ingredients to make the food healthy. Then from a work perspective, one of the things you do when you work for a Japanese company, maybe less with an international company in Japan, is to attend what we call a nomikai. Nomi means to drink, kai it means meeting. So basically it's a party you would have on a Friday evening with your colleagues, and the Japanese will all take a beer and start to get drunk, because they get drunk very quickly, and they would become very, very friendly. And you would typically do that in an izakaya, which is a restaurant where you have lots of choice on the menu, so you can just pick many different things. So the problem with that is Muslims, obviously, the nomikai part doesn't work very well because Muslims don't drink alcohol.
Mhm.
Of course, Japanese people are very understanding. So if you order tea, it's fine, but that will put you aside from the group, which is a small, difficult part of, will make feeling getting together with your colleagues. That will put you a bit apart, and that's a bit sad. And the izakaya, well, you have lots of choice, but again, it's not designed at all for vegans. So you might just eat edamame, so soybeans, basically, maybe small pieces of tomatoes, but everything else will come, and it will be a mix of either fish or meat with other things. And nomikai is really an important part of the culture. Many Japanese people don't like it because they have to spend money to pay for it, and they have to go, so they can't just go back home. But it's a part of the culture. Also, in many cases, the izakaya, people will be smoking, so it's not so comfortable for many Westerners. Another thing is, as I said earlier, many of the very famous Japanese foods based on meat. So ramen is made with broth based on pork. Some of the onigiri rice balls might be containing some broth based on bonito, so fish. So yeah, you have to be a bit flexible, or you have to explain very well to people around you that you're very strict for health reasons, for religious reasons, and they will just try to make things work for you.
People will typically go pretty well out of their way to try to accommodate others, but unfortunately, because kind of the point of the nomikai is to make a group more cohesive, if you can't participate fully, unfortunately, you might not end up getting as much out of it as you otherwise would have.
Exactly. Especially if you're a foreigner and you don't speak that much Japanese, nonverbal communication can be the strongest way to establish bonds with your colleagues. So getting kind of drunk together is one of the ways in Japan that things could be done very easily.
So, do you have any other advice for people who have these kinds of dietary restrictions? Some things that they should know about before they go to the country?
For travelers, I would say you have to plan in advance. You can find lots of information online, at least for the big cities. If you want to go in the countryside, you might need to spend much more time or ask the help of somebody who can read Japanese. So could just be using a travel agent to plan things in secondary destinations. So typically that would be if you come back to Japan for the second, third time, fourth time. I would recommend to make reservations too, and maybe just don't go for the small onigiri rice bowl in the convenience store and the tomatoes in the supermarket, because that will be fine, but when you go back to your country, you will feel you didn't really make anything exceptional. So you should try to have meals in places that are a bit special. For example, I strongly recommend going to Kangaan, which is one of the restaurants in a Buddhist temple in Kyoto near the former imperial palace. It's kind of expensive. This one is expensive. That would be maybe the one meal I would recommend. So you would pay between $45 to $100 per person, but that would be a huge course with beautiful vegan food. The staff speaks English, and you would have an amazing experience. The texture, the taste, maybe not the smell, because there is no smell basically, and the surroundings are really, really good. People who live here, so people who would be maybe students, who will be expats, who come for a business meeting, who stay for a few days or a few weeks, I would recommend asking help from your colleagues, from your professor, from the secretary, pointers for they will look for information for restaurants where you can eat. And if you're staying really long time, probably you want to learn how to cook with Japanese ingredients like miso, and how to read the labels. Also, you can use a lot of online shopping nowadays. Depending on where you live, you can use services of Costco, for example. So you can very easily find vegan products coming from abroad. You can use dedicated online shops like Alishan, and there will be more options coming little by little. We don't do too much food delivery at home yet, but things are changing. So if you're in a big city, you might have more chances to have access to vegan food, even if it's a bit far and you can't just walk there.
So basically, luckily, if you go to Japan without any preparations, you will survive. But if you do some research, if you do some preparations ahead of time, it'll definitely pay off. So I really suggest that if you have any dietary restrictions, just do your best to do your homework ahead of time. It'll make things so much easier later on.
Exactly.
So do you personally have any examples of culture-related communication breakdowns in Japan?
Probably could find a lot. I've been here for 15 years. So what happens, I've been here for 15 years, so many things happen, but at the same time, I forgot most of the things that happened at the beginning, which is the funniest. I think I can give two examples. We're just talking about food, so I will start with an example related to food. When you're learning the Japanese language, you will learn something like itadakimasu, and I think you introduced that word in one of your previous podcasts. So itadakimasu is something you would say when you're starting to eat. In France, we would say bon appétit, which means good appetite, enjoy your meal, to other people when we start to eat together and when we are leaving a restaurant and we see them at a different table. But itadakimasu is not something you say to other people. It's something you will say even if you're alone at the top of a mountain and you're going to start to eat your bento lunchbox. It means I receive. And what happened once is when I was a student and just starting to learn Japanese, I was leaving a restaurant, the university restaurant, and I just saw some Japanese and I said itadakimasu to them. And they were very, very complex. I mean, they were wondering like what I was talking about because nobody says that to other people. And I had already finished to eat anyway. So we had this kind of huge gap. Now, from a more business-oriented perspective, there is one thing I think everybody lives at some point. It's going to meetings and assuming you're speaking Japanese already, and having people say hi, hi, hi all the time, which means yes. And you finish the meeting, and in my case, I go back to the company where I was working. I said the meeting went very well. They agreed with everything. And a few days later, you understand that they didn't agree with everything because in Japanese, hi is the right way to just tell you, I'm listening to you. I understand what you say, but not necessarily I agree. If they can agree or not, but that's not really the point. So the way the translation is correct, but the way it's used makes cultural communication breakdowns very, very easy. And even over time, I'm still not very sure. And I think many Japanese people around me are not necessarily sure at the end of meetings if people agreed or not, but at least we are aware that there is this possible difference.
Yeah, a very clear example of why it's so important to learn the language and the culture together, not just one or the other. Because even in English, if you're having in English, is the other party, Japanese education system, they more focus on translation, writing, and things like that. So they don't maybe understand what yes means to somebody from the West. So they may just not realize that they're saying yes, 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 and we think that they agree, but they actually don't. So you still have to be careful of it, even if they're speaking in English.
That's true. And you have also kind of the other side of the coin, and that would be that Japanese people are not expressing that much when they disagree, because they try to, I think it's part of being respectful in Japan is not to show disagreement or to tell people they are wrong. And because you don't have this kind of negative signs coming in the discussion, you are also more likely to believe there is agreement when there is no agreement. I think if I go to America and people disagree, they will not say yes, of course, but they will also tell me, no, you're wrong, or I don't want to do it that way, or let's plan a different calendar, or let's use a different supplier, or something else.
Or that's interesting. Maybe we should think about this, that sort of thing.
I think it's really important when you have when you do business in Japan, people are super open to foreigners speaking a little bit Japanese, and they will appreciate that a lot. But the language is really not the only thing. You need to understand the cultural part, and when you get an interpreter, if you have like an important contract or you're coming with your boss from America, I think it's important to have maybe either an interpreter with skilled, not just somebody who speaks Japanese, somebody who worked and knows how to interpret things in a more like a conceptual way, or to have local Japanese people who are bilingual from the other company to help with the translation, and still be very careful where there might be some misunderstandings based on culture.
You need a cultural interpreter as well as a language interpreter.
Yes.
So, if somebody was going over to Japan for business and they could only know one thing about the country or the culture ahead of time, what would you say that one thing should be?
It's a tough question
Yeah.
because I think the culture is so different. So, of course, there is an example I just gave about people saying hi, which doesn't necessarily mean yes. So I'm
Mhm.
just putting that aside. If I had to choose only one thing in the context of business success in Japan, I would say just know that people will appreciate any small effort you will make, your interest in the culture, in Japanese people. And that comes in many ways. People will be happy just if you know how to say arigato, which means thank you, or konnichiwa to say hello, or if you bring a small gift, which is, it doesn't need to be expensive, but it's part of the Japanese culture to bring, for example, some cookies that are famous in your region. So something that people you can easily bring to Japan. Small cookies from your area. Um, this is really a small effort that will make people feel you have been trying to understand the culture and trying to communicate with people. And you don't need to be perfect. Making mistake is absolutely not a problem. People will appreciate when they see the effort, and I think it's about the effort.
Yeah, that's a really good thing to point out because at least for me, I was always too worried about making a fool out of myself. But it really is just the effort that people appreciate, especially because proportion to the number of people who go to Japan for business, the proportion of people who are legitimately interested in the country, make an effort in the country to actually understand the people there is relatively small. So anything you can do to show that effort and appreciation will definitely go a long way.
Well, another aspect is come to sign a contract to establish a partnership. It's different if you come to get a job, but if you come to establish a partnership or a contract, the process is going to be long, and it's going to be
Mm.
based on trust and on the relationship you establish kind of personally in work context, but directly with the persons. So doing these things brings you very close to the Japanese, and that helps you succeed, I think.
All right. Well, that's a perfect way to end. Thank you so much for your time, Sebastian.
Thanks a lot for your time and for inviting me.
I hope that you enjoyed our conversation today as much as I did. While the Japan Travel website doesn't specialize in people with specific diets, check out the link below to Sebastian's contributions, as he is working hard to get that information out to people who need it, so they can truly enjoy their time in Japan. And like I mentioned earlier, they are working to expand their content into 15 languages, so you can share the website with people all around the world who might benefit from it. Also, remember to reach out to me if you're interested in gaining access to my cheat sheet for studying Japanese. You can find my email address in the description of this episode. But for now, remember that the more you learn, the more confident you will become as you explore all of the opportunities Japan has to offer you. So if you found the information here today useful, please subscribe for more Japanese language and cultural guidance. And if you enjoyed the podcast and want to hear more content in the future, please consider leaving a review. It really helps other people find the show. And of course, if you have any other questions, comments, or suggestions for future episodes or interview topics, please email me at businesssuccessjapan@gmail.com. Until next time, mata kondo!